Welcome back to Human Biology with Dr. B. Today we are talking about the digestive system, otherwise known as the gastrointestinal tract. So let's start with structure and function. There it is, all the way down. It is simply a long, hollow tube into which a number of accessory organs and glands release their secretions. This tract begins right here at the mouth and ends all the way down here at the pooper. That's what it does. The whole goal of the digestive system is to take all of the food and all of the components that we put into our mouth, break them down into smaller molecules that can then be absorbed into the blood and give the body energy. There it is. There's all the organs of the digestive tract all the way from here. We're going to discuss each of these in detail. We start with the mouth. We move down to the pharynx, the esophagus, stomach, down to the small intestine, the colon. Within the colon, we have the cecum, the rectum, and the anal canal. And then our accessory structures, we have the salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So first, let's talk about the actual structure of the GI tract. There are 4 different layers of structure all the way through, from the mouth, the esophagus, all the way down to the large intestine. The mucosa is the innermost lining of the GI tract. It is moist and it secretes a ton of mucus, which is why it's called, wait for it, the mucosa. Yeah. So mucus is not just that nasty stuff that you like hawk up when your mouth gets real dry, but mucus actually helps lubricate and move the foodstuffs all the way through your digestive tract. Then we have the submucosa. This is just underneath it. It's a layer of connective tissue where all of the capillaries and veins and neurons move in and to and connect with the digestive tract. Then we have the muscularis. The muscularis has a double layer of smooth muscle. The exception to this is in the stomach, where there are 3 layers to the muscularis. Now, in the muscularis, these layers of muscle are perpendicular to each other. So the innermost layer squeezes like you're grabbing a toothpaste tube. And the outermost layer is longitudinal. And think about laying the toothpaste tube down on the counter and pushing on it. That's how the longitudinal layer works. And then the external layer is called the serosa, and this is the connective tissue. This is what holds your guts in place, basically, and holds it together. So digestion is the main thing that the GI tract does, and it does it 2 ways. The first is mechanical digestion. Look at that carrot, it's so delicious. Mechanical digestion, the actual definition, is the physical breaking of food into smaller pieces. This is what's happening in your teeth, and this happens in your stomach as well. Then we have chemical digestion, where we use enzymes to physically break the bonds of the chemicals in the food that we eat, so that those smaller molecules can be absorbed into the bloodstream and supply all of our cells with energy. So here are the digestive organs. We have the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. All of the other organs associated with this are what we call accessory structures. So let's start with the mouth. First of all, the main thing the mouth does is it has the teeth. The teeth, their whole goal, their one job is the mechanical digestion of food. To break that food stuff into smaller particles. And you've never fully appreciated your teeth until you accidentally swallow a tortilla chip without chewing it fully. And then you realize, that's pokey and hard. The next thing that the mouth has is the salivary glands, and you can see all 3 of these highlighted here. The parotid, the sublingual, and the submandibular. Now, water moistens the food. The mucus produced by the mucosal layer in your mouth binds the food together, and then the parotid, sublingual, and submandibular glands also secrete a number of enzymes, the main one of which is salivary amylase, and this begins chemical digestion primarily of carbohydrates. And the third part of the mouth is the tongue. Now, the tongue is a large skeletal muscle. It is much larger than you and I think. You and I think of these cute little tiny little tongue sticking out, but your tongue actually goes all the way back and has this massive attachment at the bottom of your mouth. Not only does the tongue help move the food around the mouth to continue mechanical digestion, and I love the way this is described, the tongue actually helps you process the quality of the food. If you've ever, as my kids call it, consumed, quote, spicy milk, you know, the milk that's in the sippy cup that you find from underneath the couch. Spicy milk, that's what we call it. Your tongue has taste buds that allow you the ability to establish, oh, is this good quality food or is this not good quality food? If I eat this, I might get sick. And then you spit it out. Or it can trigger also the vomit reflex. So the pharynx is the next part of the digestive system, and we move from the mouth. The tongue pushes the food back to the pharynx. This is a passageway shared by both the respiratory and the digestive system, so we've heard of this before. Now, the three things that occur in the pharynx are number one, swallowing. And swallowing has two components. It has a voluntary component and an involuntary component. The voluntary component is when your tongue physically pushes the bolus, that's what we call the mechanically compressed food that moves to the back of your throat and then down into your esophagus. And then we have the involuntary component where the soft palate, it's at the very back of your mouth, prevents food from entering into the nasal cavities, as well as within the larynx, the epiglottis covers over your trachea to prevent the food from being inhaled into your lungs. And so that way it goes down the esophagus. So this picture down here shows you both the voluntary and the involuntary phase of swallowing. In the voluntary phase, the first thing the tongue does is it pushes the food back towards the pharynx, which is right here. And you can see here, you can see the esophagus and the windpipe right here. Now, in this instance, the esophagus is closed. However, during the involuntary phase, when the bolus moves back down the pharynx, down the back of the throat, the epiglottis will cover the trachea and the bolus will move down the esophagus, which actually brings us to the esophagus. Now, the esophagus is simply put a muscular tube that transports food from the pharynx to the stomach. There is no digestive quality or anything that happens in the esophagus. It is simply a transportation method. Food is moved along the esophagus and down to the stomach by what we call peristalsis. Peristalsis is this rhythmic movement and muscle contraction of the esophagus that moves the bolus down to your stomach. And as I mentioned, the esophagus has zero role in mechanical or chemical digestion. It is simply there. It's your Uber. It's to get you there from point A to point B. That's it. That's all. The stomach, as we talked about earlier, has three layers. It has an X, a Y, and a Z layer of smooth muscle. And this is because the main job of the stomach is to mix. Think of your electric mixer. That's what your stomach does. It mixes, it contracts, it folds, it moves. You can actually feel your stomach peristalting, if you will. That's the correct terminology. After you eat food. So that way, the food that moves down the esophagus through the esophageal sphincter into the stomach can fully contact the hydrochloric acid and the digestive enzymes that the stomach produces. So first of all, the stomach is a J shape, as you can see here. At the top, we have a band of circular muscle that we call a sphincter that allows the bolus in and prevents the chyme, because once it is here in the stomach and contacts the digestive juices, the hydrochloric acid, this cardiac sphincter needs to shut down to prevent movement back up the esophagus. And when we do have movement of the chyme, because once it becomes liquefied, that's what we call it, if that does move back up into the esophagus, this is what we call heartburn. The functions of the stomach are, number one, to store food. Now, we've never been more aware of how much food your stomach can store than on Thanksgiving, where we just continue to eat all the amazing food. Also, the stomach regulates the release of the chyme, which is what the foodstuff is. Once it has contacted all the hydrochloric acid, it's been mixed with a ton of water and enzymes. And it regulates release through, down here, the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine. As well, chemical digestion of proteins and carbohydrates. Carbohydrate digestion continues in the stomach, whereas protein digestion initiates. And in order to do this, we have gastric glands. You can see them here. This is what the mucosal lining of the stomach looks like. And at the bottom, we have these gastric pits. Now, gastric pits produce two things. They produce hydrochloric acid as well as intrinsic factor. Now, hydrochloric acid is present because, as we mentioned, your GI tract is nothing but a hollow tube through your body. And when something contacts the external environment, there is a lot of bacteria that come with it. So the hydrochloric acid kills the negative bacteria. It helps break down connective tissue in the animal foods that you eat. It activates pepsinogen, cleaves it to pepsin, which allows for the breakdown of proteins, as well as the intrinsic factor is necessary for the absorption of vitamin B12, which is your happy vitamin. And then we move to the small intestine. Now, the small intestine has three major parts. We have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. And we can remember these three in sequence by thinking, don't jump in. D, J, I. Duodenum, jejunum, ileum. The duodenum is directly after the stomach. We can see the pyloric sphincter here and then the duodenum. The jejunum is the majority of the small intestines, and the ileum is what will connect with the large intestine right here. The functions of the small intestine are twofold. The first function is chemical digestion. While chemical digestion begins in the stomach, it is continued and finished in the small intestine. Now, chemical digestion breaks down carbohydrates, protein, fats, and nucleic acid into their absolute simplest form. And then all of these, as you can see here, all of these monomers are then absorbed through the mucosal lining of the small intestine and move into the capillaries. Now, enzymes of the small intestine, pancreas, liver, all the bile stored in the gallbladder, etc., these are released into the small intestine to allow for full digestion of all of the food stuff that is moving through your body. And the second function of the small intestine is absorption. And the way that the small intestine does this is by a massive surface area. Now, we know that we have about 5 to 6 feet of small intestines, guts, if you will, in your abdominal cavity. However, within that 5 to 6 feet of small intestines, we actually have a much larger surface area within that. And the surface area allows for the small intestine to increase the amount of absorptive real estate that it has. So the surface area is increased by the pleated lining. You can see here the circular folds, the plicae circularis, that's the technical term for them. And then within those we have villi. Villi are finger-like projections into which both the capillaries and veins, as well as the lacteal, the lacteals are part of the lymphatic system, move into the villi. And then within the villi, or on the villi, we have microvilli, which are even smaller projections that allow for increased absorptive surface area within the small intestine. Then we get to our accessory digestive organs, because most of these accessory digestive organs secrete into the small intestine to aid with its digestive properties. So the pancreas makes pancreatic juice. That's what it's called. It is a combination of a number of digestive enzymes as well as bicarbonate ions. Bicarbonate ions are incredibly important because, as you can see here, the pancreas, this is the common bile duct, joins with the gallbladder and the liver in secreting the digestive juices right here. So here's the stomach, here's the pyloric sphincter. Through the pyloric sphincter, we move into the duodenum. Now, once the chyme, it's combined with hydrochloric acid, a number of digestive enzymes here in the stomach, it moves into the duodenum. In order for the duodenum not to get eaten alive by the hydrochloric acid, the pancreas secretes with the digestive juices a number of bicarbonate ions, which, as we learned from our chemistry chapter, allow for a buffering effect and decrease the acidity of the chyme entering the duodenum. So that way it basically helps save your small intestine. We also have the gallbladder. It's this lovely pear-shaped green. It's always in green in all the pictures. And the gallbladder stores, modifies, and concentrates the bile that is produced by the liver. And then it releases into the duodenum along with the pancreatic juices. Then we get to the liver. The liver is an incredibly important organ in our body. It is the largest organ in our abdominal cavity. It's massive. One of the main things that the liver does is produce bile. It also regulates blood glucose level, and it does this through what we call the hepatic portal system. So follow me here. So here we're in the small intestine. The products of digestion are absorbed into the capillaries. These capillaries, as opposed to going back up and depositing directly into the heart and then spreading through the systemic circulation, these capillaries go up into the liver, where they basically hang out in the hepatic portal system. Now, a portal system, I like thinking of it like a river or a stream coming into a pond before trickling out on the other end. Now, this isn't necessarily a pond, but basically it does pause in the liver in order that the blood contents can be modified. And the contents coming from the digestive system before they absolutely hit your systemic circulation can be modified. The liver also helps package lipids with proteins to form lipoproteins so they're easier to digest and to absorb, as well as your liver is responsible for removing poisonous substances and adjusting the blood glucose levels. Which brings us all the way down the small intestine to the large intestine. Over here, right here, is where the ileum joins the cecum, which is the first part of the large intestine. You can see here the appendix just kind of hangs out. That's literally what it looks like. We believe this to be a vestigial immune organ that no longer has any purpose except to become infected when the poop stuff gets stuck in this little area and then causing us lots of pain. The large intestine, two main goals of the large intestine. Number one, as the food is being digested and absorbed all the way through from the stomach down in the small intestine, I believe it's about 3 liters of water are added from your body into the foodstuff to help emulsify it and dilute it so that the smaller molecules can be easily absorbed. So now we get to the colon, and all of a sudden all of that water needs to be reabsorbed so that we don't lose it and so that we don't dehydrate ourselves. The second thing that the large intestine does is it stores and then eliminates feces, otherwise known as poop. Now, within the large intestine, we have 4 major areas. We have the cecum, we have the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal. So here you go. Here's the cecum. This whole area right here is known as the colon. This is the rectum, and then the anal canal is right here. Within the colon, we have 3 different areas, 4 actually, of the colon. We have the ascending, we have the transverse, we have the descending, and then the sigmoid colon. The sigmoid colon is named because it kind of has an S shape. So let's talk about pooping. Pooping is done via peristalsis. As we talked about, peristalsis is the same movement that we see in the esophagus as well as in the stomach. Peristalsis is where there is a pressure from the smooth muscle above the bolus of food, and this pushes the bolus of food in a downward motion. So basically, peristalsis moves the foodstuff through the large intestine, and then feces are pushed into the rectum. Now, the whole purpose of the rectum is poop storage, until finally it gets too big and it triggers your internal anal sphincter and says, hey, guess what? There's a lot of poop right here. I'm going to need you to find a restroom really soon. And so when the defecation reflex, this is horrible. I'm sorry. Poop is just so funny. But this is the moment where all of a sudden, as my husband describes it, you feel like a turtle head is poking out. End quote. I can't believe I just said that. At any rate, this is where you feel the urge to defecate. So you run and find a restroom rapidly. So in order to allow for the poop to move into the toilet, the internal sphincter, which is an involuntary muscle. So you have no control over it. That relaxes. And then the external sphincter, you actually have control of, and for that we are extremely thankful. This is under voluntary control. So the poop can actually hang out just above the external sphincter before it is released. The more you know. And that brings us to the end of our digestive tract. You should be able to now explain how the structure of the GI tract is related to its function, list the layers of the GI tract, compare and contrast the two types of digestion that the GI tract performs, as well as describe all of the major structures and organs, as well as the functions of each organ in the digestive tract. Thanks for joining us again. This has been Dr. B. I'll see you next time.